All right, welcome to The Explainer. Today we're diving into a company that's building the nuts and bolts for the final frontier. I'm talking about Redwire Corporation. Their whole bet is that the real money in space, well, it's not going to be in finding some sort of space gold. It's in selling the picks and shovels.
So let's kick things off with a really fundamental question. As we push further out into orbit and even beyond, how in the world do you build a real, functioning economy out there in space?
Well, it turns out the answer is, it's kind of the same one that made a lot of people rich during the gold rush. You don't go digging for the gold yourself. No, you sell the picks and shovels, the essential tools that everyone else needs to get their job done.
And that right there is exactly Redwire's game plan. See, they're not the ones launching the giant rockets. Instead, they're building all the critical stuff that goes on those rockets. The power systems, the docking ports, the platforms, all the things that actually make a space economy possible in the first place.
But here's where the story gets really interesting. Just when everyone was starting to get a handle on Redwire as this pure-play space company, boom, they made a massive pivot. A single acquisition in 2025 completely changed the game for them, altering their entire strategy and where they sit in the market. And just look at how fast this all happened. It's really remarkable. We're talking about just over 6 months. In that tiny window, they dropped nearly $1 billion to buy their way into the defense drone market. They dealt with some serious financial headwinds, raised more capital, and then completely reorganized their entire business. That is a whirlwind.
So what does this all mean? Well, this move was a complete identity shift. Think about it. Before, Redwire was basically a collection of suppliers. They made parts for the big projects. But after? They became a prime contractor. That means they're now the ones leading the projects, competing head-to-head for those huge government contracts in both space and defense. It's a whole new league.
And this is the result, this new two-pronged structure. On one side, you've got the space segment. That's all their classic flight-proven tech like solar arrays and docking systems. And on the other side, you have this brand new defense tech segment, focused on things like autonomous drones and super advanced surveillance gear. The strategy here is crystal clear, right? They want to be able to win big contracts from both NASA and the Pentagon. Okay, so they've got this new structure, but how do they defend it? What's their secret sauce? Let's dig into the core technology that gives Redwire an edge that, frankly, is really hard for competitors to copy. In the business world, people talk about a moat. It's basically what protects your castle, your company, from invaders. Competitors. For Redwire, that moat is built on two really key things. First, patented technology. But second, and this is huge, something called flight heritage. That's just a fancy way of saying their stuff is actually flown in space and worked, for years, in that incredibly harsh environment. That's a track record you can't just buy. So let's talk about their biggest moat. It's called ROSA, which stands for Rollout Solar Array. Now, instead of picturing those big, clunky, rigid solar panels that take up a ton of room on a rocket, think of ROSA as more like a high-tech blanket. It rolls up into this tight little cylinder for launch, and then once it's in space, it just unfurls. Kind of like pulling down a window shade. Super simple, super clever. And why is this such a game changer? Well, because it's lighter, it's way smaller, and it generates 20% more power. This is a huge deal. And this isn't just some drawing on a whiteboard. This tech is already up there, right now, powering parts of the International Space Station, and it's set to power the Gateway Station that's going to orbit the moon. It's the real deal. All right, their second big moat is their IBDM docking system. The best way to think about this is it's the universal USB port for space. Seriously, you've got all these different spacecraft from different countries, different companies, all flying around up there. They need a standard way to connect to each other, for refueling, for transferring cargo, for moving crew around. Redwire makes that standard. And that basically makes them the gatekeeper for all the logistics that happen in orbit. Okay, so the tech is awesome, the strategy is super bold, but that brings us to the million-dollar question, or in this case, the multi-million-dollar question that has Wall Street completely divided. Is the company actually financially healthy? If you just look at the top line, the revenue story looks incredible. After they made that big acquisition, you can see sales just shot through the roof in the third quarter of 2025, jumping way over $100 million. Looks great, right? Well, here's the paradox. That record-breaking number, it was still 21% below what Wall Street analysts were expecting. The company pointed to delays in government contracts, which happens, but a miss that big? Yeah, that was enough to really spook investors and send the stock price tumbling. And you can see that tension playing out right here in the key numbers.
Revenue is climbing, which is good, but then you look at adjusted EBITDA, which is basically a way to measure profitability, and it's still in the red. They're not making a profit yet. But then you look at the contracted backlog, that's confirmed business they have lined up for the future, and that number is growing and growing.
And that backlog number is the key. We're talking about over $355 million. That's more than a third of $1 billion in signed, sealed, delivered deals just waiting to be fulfilled. So what this tells you is the demand for their stuff is definitely there. The big challenge is just the timing of the cash and actually turning that demand into profit.
So this brings us to the big question, right? For anyone looking at this company, it's a real puzzle. With all these conflicting signals, how do you even begin to value it? What's the bull case versus the bear case? It's that classic tug-of-war between a super exciting high-growth story and the hard reality of the bottom line. And hey, don't just take my word for it. You can see this whole debate playing out right here among the Wall Street pros. I mean, look at this. You've got one firm saying the stock's worth $22 a share and another saying it's only worth $6. They are all looking at the exact same information and coming to completely opposite conclusions. It's wild.
So let's talk about the cautious view, the bear case, if you will. It really boils down to these key risks. First, they are super dependent on government budgets, which can be, unpredictable. They're also burning through a lot of cash to grow, and there's a chance they might have to issue more stock to raise money, which could mean everyone's slice of the pie gets a little bit smaller.
So at the end of the day, it really comes down to this. The bulls, the optimists, they see an absolutely essential infrastructure company. They see that huge backlog as proof of demand, and they love the pivot into defense. But the bears, the pessimists, they see a company that isn't profitable, that's burning cash, and that's basically at the mercy of government paperwork. And you know what? Both sides have really good points.
And that leaves us with the final big question. Is Redwire just a really risky bet on a company that hasn't figured out how to make money yet? Or is it the absolutely essential foundation that our entire future in space and defense is going to be built on for decades to come? The answer to that question isn't just about one company's stock price. It's really about how this whole new space economy is actually going to get built.